Hi everyone, it's Michael, and it's time for the October 2021 Orchid Collection update. You'll have to forgive me for struggling to speak over my Invisalign, but I want to start this video by just offering everyone a huge thank you. You know, I had a bit of an epiphany recently because I have been struggling with really debilitating anxiety and stress around producing content in a timely fashion for this channel. But I realized that that stress is entirely self-imposed. You have all been so lovely, so patient, so kind, and so considerate of my professional obligations that exist outside of this channel. So it allows me to take a deep breath and relax a bit because I know that I have a loving, kind community that understands where I'm coming from. Having said all of that, let's talk about the plants. The plants are doing really well, or at least the ones that are properly situated. A lot of good things happening with the plants that are potted in semi-hydroponics, but for the plants that are not, things could be happening better. Now, they're not suffering, they're not struggling terribly, but they're not doing as well as they could be doing. And I think that's in large part because I'm extracting principles that have been successful in semi-hydroponics and applying them to the plants that are not potted in semi-hydro. To be more specific, I think about the glass containers. The glass containers are fantastic when they are potted exclusively in leca. But when I get experimental, like for my catasetums where I do the top dressing of sphagnum moss, or when I do my oncidiums that have a little layer of leca at the bottom to the drainage holes and then bark, they're just not thriving the way that they could be. And I'm not sure, I wish I knew exactly who it was, but somebody in the comments said, well, effectively you're creating a swamp, an oxygen-free swamp, because it's just too densely packed for there to be any real circulation or ability to breathe. And it's funny because it's so obvious, and I don't know why I didn't think about it, but I think because I assume that the respiratory processes of the plants are so well preserved in a semi-hydroponic grow container that just translated, but it absolutely doesn't. So, long story short, I'm exploring repotting a great many of my orchids because, again, they can just be doing better. But also, I will say that there's a unique timeline that I'm beginning to observe. Orchids are resilient plants, with their pseudobulbs, with their canes. They are master survivors. They are great at storing energy in their bulbs and leveraging it even when they're not getting the optimal circumstances. This is why, in large part, orchids take so long to die. But having said that, there is a threshold, and after about 2 years of deferring to its own energy reserves, you can really start to see that the plants are not getting what they need. So if you are not meeting the nutritional needs, the light needs, the watering needs, the humidity needs of these plants, they might do very well for you for a period of about 1 to 2 years, but you'll really start to see it after then. So some of the plants that have been not thriving, that have been kind of flying under the radar, are now beginning to reveal themselves. So that just creates increased urgency for me to transition their grow method. So having said that, I'm going to spend some time, I'm probably just going to revisit Danny's channel and just spend some time watching her methodologies, because I think just reverting to classic grow medium into classic potting containers could be really, really beneficial for some of my plants. So I will keep you posted on that journey. In regard to my system this month, it's the exact same as it was last month. I'm continuing to flush all of the orchid containers once to twice a month. I am watering in between those flushes with dilute nutrient solution composed of Dynagrow and CalMag. Then from there, I am misting the plants every morning, keeping the humidifier on and sustaining a strong source of moving air, which is the overhead fan. Now, having said all of that, let's jump in and take a look at the plants that have something new, different, and interesting happening this month. Jumping in with number 3 in the collection, this is my Willsonara Aloha Sparks. Now, what I want to showcase here is this is a prime example of a plant that could just be doing better. It's not doing terribly, but it certainly isn't at its optimal growth. Now, when I take you in, you can see I have a top dressing of sphagnum moss, and that was there to really coax and encourage root growth into the leca. And as you can see, that was very successful. But now that the roots are in there, I think that they're just having a hard time breathing, which is in part why this has produced such a flush of aerial roots. Now, I do want to get this repotted, and I'm thinking that if I put this maybe into a good plastic container with a lot of ventilation, with just classic bark medium, it will do fantastic. Now, it's not stifled. It's not like it's struggling to grow. You can see it has this beautiful new growth coming in on the side here. But again, I think that will be more well situated in a more high humidity, high moisture environment. So that's just my thought on this one. It can definitely be doing better. On to number 8 in the collection. This is my Bannfield Aromatic Maze, and I just want to echo exactly what I just said with number 3 with this one as well. If I take you in, you can see, look at this beautiful new growth it's producing. Look at these vigorous, healthy green root tips, but they are all out in the air. Now, it's not struggling, it's not dying off. There's nothing bad happening to this plant, but again, it could be doing much better. I also think that this one needs to have some of the old bulbs divided and removed because it's just not making contact with the potting medium at all. It's not getting the moisture that it needs. So again, I think that this one will just go into a classic grow setup with more ventilation and more contact with bark medium. On to number 11 in the collection, my pride and joy, my Psychopsis mendenhall-hildos. Unfortunately, there are none that are currently in bloom, but you can see that all of those sequential flower spikes are continuing to produce, and this one is getting very, very close to opening. But this one has just been so reliable. There is a new growth coming in right here at the base, which I believe will produce a flower spike very quickly. Let me see if I can take you in on it. Do you see it peeking through right in the middle? That's a brand new growth right here. So I think that soon enough, I will have 4 flower spikes coming off of this bad boy, and I am just so pleased to see it. On to number 13 in the collection. This is my Fragmo cedenyi, and I'm just obsessed. Another sequential bloomer. Look how stunning. Oh, just so beautiful. And you can see it has another bud that is just beginning to open behind it, and then another one developing behind that. So this will stay in bloom for, I think last year it stayed in bloom for 3 to 4 months. And that's just on one fan. There's a second fan here that also has a flower spike coming in. So I'm just so excited for this one to continue to delight me and dazzle me with its blooms, but also kind of strange that it's doing so well. This one is in leca with just a slight top dressing of sphagnum moss, which does not seem like the best fit for it. But having said that, I don't want to make the same mistake that I made with my alisara, which is repotting it prematurely when there's really no issue or no compelling reason to do it. Because I think that could potentially also create some very real problems. So I'm just gonna keep watching this one because it keeps blooming for me and it seems quite happy. So really, really pleased about that. All right, moving on to number 16 in the collection. This is my Dapper Dots Nicolasa tavros catasetum. And actually, you know, it's kind of interesting. I didn't think it was doing that well, but look how much larger this year's growth is than the previous years. It's not super stable in the container, but I don't think that's a huge problem because if it falls off, then it's just its own pseudobulb. And it's interesting because this one has already entered dormancy totally of its own will and volition. Some of my catasetum types really have to be coaxed into dormancy. It's like they will never stop growing if you do not force them to. But this one is pretty good about dropping its leaves right after Halloween, like clockwork. So that's just kind of interesting. Now, another one of my very consistent bloomers is, of course, number 25 in the collection. This is my epidendrum green hornet or my Pristichia green hornet. Just such a lovely, consistent beauty. I'm just obsessed with this one. And the fragrance, I swear, the older it gets, the more intense the fragrance becomes. And I don't dislike that at all. I think it's really, really interesting and charming. But I will say, again, like the other plants, this one is just growing so willfully out of the container. It has gotten so expansive and so big, it needs to be divided. But what I do want to showcase here is look at this new growth. Do you see all the discolorations that are happening? It's super unfortunate because I don't know if I'm just being picky, but it really mars the beauty of the plant. But there's a real problem happening here that I think can be resolved if the roots are making better contact with potting medium and can breathe at the same time. So this one is a similar story to what I showcased with number 3 and number 8. It just needs I think a comprehensive repot. Now on to number 26. This is just like the little engine that could. This is my Alisara stellar, and you might remember it was starting to do really well, and I got so excited and I said, you know, this is gonna do much better in classic bark medium. So I potted it like I described, and it hated it because it can't breathe. And I thought it was gonna die for sure. I was preparing to film it in loving memory, but look at the base down here. It's just like the little engine that could. It does not want to give up. And I don't know that it has enough energy in this pseudobulb that looks like a prune to even sustain this new growth, but gosh, it's just so sweet to watch it try, and I want to help it, and I wish I hadn't have repotted it when I did. I have not done a service to this plant, and it's really unfortunate, but it's so beautiful to watch its journey of resilience. Now, a happy story is number 28. This is my lelio catleia purple blue Hawaii. And this one, you know, it's interesting because it grew so well that none of the roots were making contact with the potting medium anymore. And I wasn't sustaining ambient humidity to make it okay. So it really started to fall back. Then I went ahead and I got it repotted. I reconnected the roots to the potting medium and to the water reservoir specifically. And you can just see it's been producing all of these lovely new growths. It is super vigorous, super happy, and very healthy. This one just loves semi-hydro so long as its root system is able to sustain regular contact with the reservoir. So really pleased to see this one mend so quickly. On to number 36 in the collection. Of course, we are looking at my Fred Clark Yara SVO After Dark Black Pearl. And you can see I am forcing it into dormancy and it just is fighting me every step of the way. This one really will just keep growing forever if you let it. And I mean, look how sizable the new year's growth is compared to the previous year. It's insane. But really hoping that this one gives me a flower spike this year. I completely disrupted it last time it went into spike because I noticed that there were spider mites, so I had to treat it, and in treating it, of course, killed off the flower spike. But this year, I think we're really well set up for blooms, so I'm just hoping that the dormancy goes smoothly, and we see a flower spike shortly. Would you get a load of this little cutie? This is my oncidium Twinkle, white pink, and just look how darling. It's just beginning to open its bloom today. And this is another prime example of what I'm talking about. This one has been blooming for me consistently for years. It is super reliable, but you can see it's crowding itself. It's trying to grow outside of the container. Surprisingly, it's managed to keep its entire root system within the container. It has a very similar setup to number 13. It's just a very slight top dressing of sphagnum moss. I do think that this one will thrive and become super expansive and very bushy if I put it into a classic grow container with a lot of ventilation and classic bark medium. But for the moment, it's not super disrupted and it's not absolutely essential to repot. So that's always the challenge, is identifying the boundary of, am I going to create secondary problems by repotting, or am I going to solve problems by repotting? So for now, I'm just gonna leave this one as is and reassess when it gets a little bit bigger, but just such a little cutie. Stepping away from the grow space for just a moment, I'm going to showcase number 51. This is, of course, my White Wedding Day Phalaenopsis, one of 3 that I still have in my collection. And like it always does, all 3 of them are in spike at the same time. This one just happened to open first, so I put it out on this nice little tray. But you can see it has been so vigorous in the time that I've had it that it's kind of lifted itself up and out of the pot. So this might require a repot soon, but it is just so happy, so healthy, and just so consistent. I love this one. Moving on to number 60 in the collection, we have my Belara Peggy Ruth Carpenter, yet another very consistent bloomer that is absolutely stunning. I love her, but like the other oncidiums in my collection, she can be doing better. This one also has just a very narrow top dressing of sphagnum moss, and then it's on top of leca. And it dries out quickly, the bulbs desiccate and rebound quite quickly, but even so, there are some impacts from that. You can see, actually, if I take you in on this flower spike, do you see how it zigzagged and kind of got stuck inside of itself? That happens very commonly with this one, and I am certain that if it wasn't happening, this plant has provided flower spikes that have 5 blooms on it at a time, and recently it's been providing just 1 or 2. So I think that this one can be doing much better with a potting container that provides more aeration, but also a more moisture retentive medium. Moving on to number 66 in the collection, this is my Brasso Catleia benosa, and this one is so interesting because, I don't know if you recall, I had it in water culture, and it wasn't doing great, not because of water culture as the cultivation method, but because of me as the grower in water culture. I just kept overlooking it, letting it dry out completely. It just didn't get regular access to water. And it didn't seem to suffer, but it definitely wasn't progressing. And I thought, let me just see how it does in semi-hydro. And as soon as I put it into semi-hydro, it threw out an expansive root system, which, I mean, you can see it. It is doing very well in the container. And the roots have embraced it so fully. They are thick, they are fleshy, and they are just continuing to expand. And the impact is evident because, I don't know if you can tell, this guy here is actually a new growth, and it will produce a flower spike shortly. And it was not that long ago that it bloomed. So I'm really excited to see this thriving so much in this grow environment. And last but certainly not least, we have number 67 in the collection. This is my Epidendrum Hybrid Rose. And I don't have anything specific to report on this one other than look at it go. You are just living your best life like a skyscraper. Another sequential bloomer. It just gets taller and taller, and it almost stresses me out. Like I'm so charmed by how vigorous this plant is, but I also don't know if it is one that I will keep in my collection for that reason. It just takes up so much space, and getting it to and from the sink when I want to flush it is a bit of a production. I just think that generally speaking, at least the grow environment that I currently have, as an urban orchid grower, I just don't know that plants that are this big suit my needs. I think that they take up too much space and they're a little too clunky for me to move as necessary. So maybe one day when I have a greenhouse, this will be one of my favorites, but for now, just my personal little skyscraper. How darling. And with that, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, as always, for choosing to spend your time with me. If you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. Be sure to support one another in the comment section because I'm so seldom available to do so. Don't forget to click subscribe and have a beautiful rest of your day. Mwah! Bye, friends.